Hello and welcome back to another episode of MapleBased Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Manny_Ottawa.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, and this is episode 8. And this is about interest rates and the Bank of Canada. And were we misled at all? And could we have done anything different along the way to maybe stop this sharp rise? So we'll find out more coming up next. All right, so we'll get right into it here. Starting off with a video from Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada.
Interest rates are very low, and they're going to be there for a long time. We recognize that Canadian businesses are facing an unusual amount of uncertainty. And so we have been unusually clear about the future path for interest rates. If you've got a mortgage, or if you're considering to make a major purchase, or you're a business and you're considering making an investment, you can be confident that interest rates will be low for a long time. Low interest rates are very low.
Okay, so what do we got to say about Mr. Tiff Macklem?
Well, there you have it. This was months after the beginning of COVID and months after the program by the Government of Canada to dish out CERB, literally $1 trillion all throughout Canada. And the Bank of Canada governor is sitting there telling Canadians during this time, don't be worried. The interest rates are going to stay low for a long time. So if anybody acted on that and assumed that to be true, certainly less than a year and a half later, we're seeing a huge spike in interest rates. And why did the Bank of Canada's governor say that? Or one could say mislead all Canadians into believing that interest rates were not going to spike. So let's look into that.
With all this math spending happening all around us.
Right. So if you look at the interest rates, I call it gross negligence, but so if you look at the interest rates, the period just before COVID, interest rates were creeping up, as you can see it, to about 4 or 5%. Now, that was where we were, and the interest rates were down to almost zero again in 2008 when it was.
Yeah, this time period. Do you remember what this was? So we can get.
Well, it starts at.
Okay, 01 to 08.
Right. Oh yeah, 01 to 08. So
okay.
So 01 to 08 is where it was. There you see 08. It went down to absolutely zero, and that was after the financial crisis. That's right there, 2008. Yep. And then they were creeping back up, and they're creeping back up to about 2-3%, and then COVID happened, and for some strange reason, we told people to stay home, not to work, but for some reason, the monetary policy was to stimulate the economy, and they brought zero interest rates down again after COVID, and that was, when we literally stopped the economy, told people to come home. So that was
paid
odd.
people to stay home.
Yeah,
paid people not to work.
Yeah, that was odd. So, but that's what happened. We're not going to get into that discussion. But so. If you go, Chris, there are 5 criteria, and if you go to
the next one,
number two. If you go to the 5 criteria, there are 5 criteria that will cause inflation, and you go. Sorry, I apologize. The next one, the 5 criteria, and I posted it on part 3, and here they are. The 5 criteria that causes inflation are government spending. Now, there's some economists that say it's only government spending that causes inflation. Did the bank of governor know at the time that he told Canadians that the interest rates are going to stay low for a long time that the government spent money? Of course he did. We spent over $1 trillion, all the governments put together. We basically doubled the Canadian debt. So we knew at that time that key factor that drives inflation is going to happen. We also knew, number 2, is were there any, the other factors are, were there any, supply chain issues? Well, we knew that. And COVID broke supply chain, so that has an effect on driving up prices. Number 3 is you know.
You switch them around there. Artificially low interest rates.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, I skipped that one. But the artificial, we're at 0%. So you don't have to be an economist to know that these are artificially low and they're going to go up.
And that's down in this graph here, right?
Right. So we're going to get into that graph. And so if you can continue with the 4 or 5.
Yep. 4 is pent up demand that's unleashed.
Well, we've had COVID. We know that people are staying at home, saving money, keeping their served money, and there's going to be a pent up demand. So COVID is going to last maybe 1 or 2 years. Well, you know, that's what basically these type of viruses last. So the Bank of Governor knew, number one, that
Governor of the Bank of Canada, right?
Yeah. He knew, number one, that there was huge government spending. He knew supply chain issues were broken. He knew that there was pent-up demand. He knew that there was supply chain issues. And he knew that interest rates were going to go up.
That was 5 major risk factors that we're all hitting at the same time.
That you knew ahead of time these were going to drive inflation. When inflation,
at the same time as he made that initial video that we posted.
He knew
at the start
all
of
this. Exactly. He knew all this. So now go to that graph there, Chris, and you'll see. Okay, well he knows that these 5 factors are there, and yet he tells Canadians interest rates are going to stay low for a very long time. Well, what does very long time mean? Well, there are mortgages. If you go out there, you can. You know, I used to be a real estate lawyer. There are mortgages at 5-year terms. Of course, there are variables. But basically, a short-term mortgage is 5 years, and there's 10-year and 20 and 30-year. So if you take the words long time, you'd have to assume that it was at least 5 years or 4 years, not 1 year after he made that pronouncement, or 1.5 years, we saw the spike in interest rates. Now, here's what's very peculiar. And I pointed in that graph on my part 3 post, it's right before you, is that the Bank of Canada purpose is to keep inflation under 2%. And if you see that horizontal line that I have, it's been at under 2%. And then, of course, the beginning of COVID, it drops a bit under 2 because obviously nobody's buying anything. And then it creeps up to over 2 around the beginning of 2021, which was expected. It's almost a year after COVID.
The lag effect you're starting to feel.
And it's going to happen. People are starting back. We're not being as locked down anymore, and people are going to go back. And so I don't understand. The governor of the Bank of Canada knows these 5 factors are happening. Then he sees inflation break at January 2021. And that's when he should have slowly started increasing from almost 0, maybe 0.25 then, and maybe a bit more in the summer of 2021, and then maybe more, but not everything. Now look at, by the time he starts his interest rates,
it's too late.
But if you look at it above the graph and just look at it, inflation was at 4 or 5%, double his target. That's when he started moving with all these factors. So, I mean, I look at these young kids and people who borrowed money on the assumption that interest rates were going to be at 0% for a long time.
Or signed a variable mortgage.
Signed a variable. There are many people that have, and
I'm one of them. Beating it last year.
Yep, and there are many people that were recommending. Well, we've heard what the governor said: stick with the variable mortgage because you've got at least 2, 3, 4 years before interest rates go up. So. It's just amazing to me. I mean, I don't know what the purpose was. Now, one can speculate. 2021, there was an election. Now, so inflation breached around January 2021. Around election time, it was at 4%. Now, that's double the goal of the Bank of Canada, but yet they
Without any increase.
Without an increase. And they waited till the election was over, and then the election's over, and they started. Now, look at the climb of the interest rates since then. 2002, I mean, it's just a matter of spike. Why? So, to repeat, the 5 factors were all there before. Interest rates, in my opinion, should have been, at least when they breached, the earliest moment was when they breached the 2% in January of 2021 and slowly increased instead of these dramatic increases.
Yep.
And we may have, maybe we may not have tackled inflation as good, but we certainly would have made people get ready, and it'd be easier for the economy to deal with a slower uptick instead of a hard uptick. Now so those are the factors. So I ask, what is he doing? Why did he do this? Why did he make that pronouncement? And if you're a Canadian and you trust your your governor of the Bank of Canada, you would say, well, yeah, we're in this for a long time. So people were hurt by it. There was a lot of damage. And, my lawyer instincts were saying if somebody was negligent and they did some damage, well, that's a wrong.
Who's at fault?
That's a tort. And interestingly enough, Chris, when you look at it, there's also a sixth factor that I put in. I forgot I mentioned the 5, but there's also a sixth factor that the government of Canada has been boasting, that it's increasing its immigration. And if you look at it in total, there's about 955,000 new Canadians each year for the last couple of years. Now, these 955,000 new Canadians, half of them are through immigration, half of them are through landed.
Is that a higher number than before?
Oh, much higher.
Okay.
Much higher.
So what was the average before, just so people know?
The average before was about 200,000-300,000.
Okay, so we're exponentially bringing in new people.
Yeah, and Canada's only 38 million people.
Yeah, so
you're
it's
adding
a good chunk of the
that's
population.
3%.
Yeah.
That's 3%
yearly
of the population.
And so in the last 3 years, that's a lot of people coming in as well.
Right. So if you just think of it in inflationary terms, okay, if you simply, I gave you the 5 factors that causes inflation. The 6th is people bidding for goods. If you add another 3% of the population, you'd at least expect to see a 2 to 3% rise in inflation because the same people are bidding on the same. Now, it doesn't work mathematically equally. It could be more supply. But clearly in the housing market, that's what's driving the cost because you can't just build new houses right away.
Yep.
You can maybe locate some bread and maybe locate some supply chain for food and other things, and that hasn't been going well. So to capitalize, to conclude the thought, you had the governor of the Bank of Canada, months after, 6-7 months after COVID started, knowing that the 6 factors, huge government spending, interest rates were at 0%, so they got to go up. You knew supply chain issues were broken. You knew there was pent-up demand after COVID. You knew that there's a million new Canadians coming, a million new people coming into Canada that are going to drive and demand goods. You know all this, and yet you tell people, and you know this is an inflationary factor, you actually see inflation break over 2% in January 2021. You stay quiet for a whole year until it's about 4 or 5% before you act, when you know this was going to happen, and people relied on you and got variable mortgages and went out and borrowed and are now deeply in trouble. So what was going on? And so I say, clearly, anybody with an economic, I took undergrad in commerce at University of Ottawa, but anybody with just a 1-year course in economics could see all this happen. The Bank of Canada has thousands of employees, and they missed these 6 very points. And then up we go. We're increasing rates. People are in trouble, and people are hurting, and people are losing a home. And I would even take you back to a year ago, February, when housing markets were at the highest peak. Interest rates were still at 0. Inflation breached the 2%. Could we avoided that real big peak, and now we have a drop? And for those people that did purchase property in January, February of 2021, they wouldn't have been hurt as much. The rise would have been less. Gradual, and people. So I'm surprised that no media has asked these questions. I'm surprised no one's put this person's feet to the fire, the governor of the Bank of Canada. But there are 6 factors that he knew that were going to raise inflation.
And not only did he not say nothing,
he said the opposite. He said the opposite.
Yeah,
Go out and borrow money. Go out and borrow money.
Everything's good for a long time.
A long time.
Very comforting.
If I asked you, Chris, in the world of borrowing money and mortgages,
and he's the expert. If you had to ask anybody, he's the expert.
Well, he's our top. Chris, I come from a time. It's a weird time that you're in. But
we're all in it together.
No,
here,
but in my time, we all questioned government officials. Government officials worked for us. So whether you be Health Canada top official or any politician, we were holding their feet to the fire. It seems now...
And they should want to be second guessed.
Of
because
course,
that's how you get an optimal system going.
Right, but it seems now that no one questions.
No,
We are all there at the pleasure of the top bureaucrats. I mean, Health Canada certainly made a bunch of mistakes with COVID, and we're all there at their pleasure, and it's wrong to question authority. It's wrong to question. And I simply put the question out there, did the governor of the Bank of Canada miss these very 6 obvious points that drive inflation and waited too long? And my answer is conclusively, yes, he did. Did he cause damage? My answer is yes, he did.
Yeah.
There you have it.
All right. Well, that's a good wrap up there. So thank you again for tuning in. We'll be back with another one now that vacation season is over. So stay tuned and be on the lookout. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you.